So I was on vacation last week, but the miners were not. They were up in Revolt. Apparently, they do not like EIP 1559, which is kind of changing the whole transaction fee method for working with Ethereum. If you've ever used Bitcoin or some sort of blockchain, you know that like you have to send a fee along with your payment. In the same way that Visa kind of bakes in a fee and normally is issued to the merchant, Bitcoin and Ethereum make you pay the fee upfront, and it'll be like in your wallet, costs like maybe 2% of the total transaction, a lot of times less. And miners recently in Ethereum have just been like gorging on the Ethereum fees. It's been nuts, like millions upon millions of dollars weekly, and it's been pretty great for them. But it's not great for the average user. And so now a big proposal is going to be put into the Ethereum blockchain in July in a hard fork, and that will address to a degree some of the transaction fee problems with Ethereum. Notably, it'll just make Ethereum easier to use. Won't necessarily decrease Ethereum transaction fees, but it will make miner revenues much lower. Miners weren't very happy about this, and they started talking about some ways that they could hard fork the network with a 51% attack, and they're kind of thinking of ways to be hostile towards the network and make sure that this proposal doesn't go in. At this point, they can't do much. It's kind of a nothing burger, in my opinion. But the Ethereum developers and Ethereum ecosystem writ large is pretty upset about the miners trying to hold up the network. And they are moving for a quicker push to ETH2, even though ETH2 is not necessarily ready. So Vitalik drew up some specs that have already kind of been floating out there on some forums for moving ETH1 into ETH2 pretty quickly. And it could happen by the end of this year or even quicker. So it's pretty interesting in Ethereum land. We're seeing miners versus devs versus the ecosystem. So I want to toss this down to Naomi. When you see this, do you think of the Bitcoin scaling wars in 2017, or does this remind you of anything else that you've seen?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's sort of this debate, like how much power do the miners have? And this has been thrown around that when they're talking about this, I've seen some tweets, people saying, well, we get all the miners over there, then we're going to move all the value over to this new network. No one's going to want Ethereum anymore. It's going to be trash because no one's using it. I think that's a little backwards because people look to the use cases on the network primarily, as far as I can see. They look to see like what they can do. At the moment, Ethereum has amazing first mover advantage in terms of the DeFi space, and it's just taking other chains so long to catch up, which is why they're so far ahead. So in order to transplant all of those things over and get them onto this new chain, that's going to be a lot of work. I just don't see all that value moving just because the miners are. You would have to get all the people who are actually using the network for these use cases to move over. That's what's fascinating about the crypto world as well. And that's why I love it, because we're kind of seeing in real time these, game theory wars play out and how these things actually work out in real time. Because the fascinating thing about Bitcoin was that it was a mix of tech and game theory, and those things had to work, in tandem. And when it was first released on the cryptography mailing list, people immediately hated it because they were like, I can see all these ways that you could poke holes through it. And when they started to think about incentive structures, they realized, oh, wait, no, this is kind of held up by incentive structures. That's how it's made robust. And so in the Ethereum case, you are kind of seeing how this game theory plays out and why it does help to kind of further entrench Ethereum. Like if the miners can't get any traction here, it really just goes to show, how all these things have to work in this careful balance. It's a fascinating world. I love it.
I'm going to toss it down to Zach because we've been tracking Ethereum for a few years now. You specifically have been editing on Ethereum for years. Right now, do you think ETH2 and ETH1 are kind of to me, they're in a crisis moment where a lot of people are expecting ETH2 to be something and it's not going to be that for a while. But now we have miners kind of pushing the network forward in a different direction. So how do you take it from an editing standpoint or from your larger perspective?
From my larger perspective, I think the larger stuff here around governance and incentive systems and working these decentralized economies out at scale is really fascinating, right? You have these different constituencies, these different stakeholders who obviously have different economic incentives. And what's happening is we're seeing this stuff being tested, right? Hard fork has always been the option to vote with your feet and do your own thing. If it came to that, I would be kind of shocked. It was interesting to see Vitalik sort of step into this storm and get these things on the table fairly quickly. But yeah, I think there is generally sort of a misunderstanding of how soon ETH 2.0 is likely to land. I think it's still a couple years out likely. So for right now, Ethereum 1x is seeing success, and it's going to be interesting to see how they port all that value over. But yeah, I think I think my broader takeaway here is just these broad constituencies who always aren't going to be aligned on incentives, and we're seeing that play out in a really interesting way.
And those constituencies are just going to get larger, right? Like as we see more mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, and we see part of the reason Ethereum's surging in popularity right now is all the work being done around NFTs and things like that. And so, as you draw in more audiences, these stakeholder groups are going to shift and change. And you're going to have, like, Zach, I think to your point, the battle of expectations around what people and what world people are entering into. And so I'm really curious, conflict is always interesting just because it really does show kind of where people are coming from and what their core incentives are. And Naomi, you kind of talked about like people are acting in their own sort of best interests, and that's being played out in real time right now. And so I'm curious about how your average users are going to start reacting to all this once they get a greater understanding of like, oh crap, like, wait, a hard fork could actually happen, which is not something your average person might be thinking about when they come onto these networks. And so as they start to scale, I just think that there's going to be some really rapid education, and fighting that game of expectations and what people are presuming is going to be easy to access or going to occur is something that the core devs and the miners and everybody else that has been a part of this community is going to have to really work on, because I really don't think, people are diving much below the surface of it right now.
Yeah, I hope that this helps educate people in a broader sense about economics and game theory, because this is something that generally people, they don't learn about this in school. They don't know how money operates. They don't really understand these financial instruments and things like game theory. And so actually having them as part of their life, if they're like, I'm diving into Ethereum because it's really cool and I can get Nyan Cat, digital JPEG or whatever, however they're getting into the world. And then suddenly they have to deal with all of these, like they have to deal with self-custody. They have to deal with, the idea of inflation. They have to kind of get to know these concepts because it affects your world if you're in the cryptocurrency world. I think that's really cool because I think we're making people smarter by getting them involved in crypto.